Joining us today as we delve into all things artificial intelligence is award-winning AI and marketing specialist and the creator of Marketing Magic, Menekşe Stewart. A very warm welcome to you.
Thank you for having me.
Pleasure to have you here. Now, let's get straight into it. For people who don't really understand or aren't really sure what AI is, how would you summarize it?
So the way that I will normally describe it to people is predictive text on steroids. So if you think about when you're writing a message to your friend and you're getting suggestions for the next word, sometimes it's really chaotic. But really, when we're using something like ChatGPT or generative AI, that's what we're seeing. So there's lots of different kinds of AI, but particularly with ChatGPT and generative AI, it's predictive text and you're just dealing with a mathematical algorithm.
And for you, AI is a really big part of your life and your career. When did your interest in AI first start?
So because my background in marketing has been search engine optimization, the first big update that Google did to its algorithm was around 2018 for machine learning, and it really impacted the way that we use keyword terms to find things on the internet. So that was really the starting point for me in terms of looking at the impact on language and how we communicate on the internet. And it has kind of grown, obviously, as things have been more and more available in the wider space.
And you say your career kind of started out in SEO. Talk us through from the beginning right through to where you are now. What kind of career path have you followed?
Yeah, so I started out, I was 15 in 2005, so you know, you can work out how old I am. But I was working in my family's business, and then we were having some financial difficulties, and I looked on an early version of Fiverr to find work, and I got some SEO writing for a Polish agency who paid me $3 per article to rewrite medical advice. Mm-hmm. So I always joke that if you took any medical advice from the internet between 2005 and 2008, I apologise, because it was written by a teenager who had no business writing it. But that was really the start of it. And then from that point, my dad is Turkish, and marketing isn't a real job. So I spent 2.5 years doing accountancy in a publishing company, and I was still doing SEO writing alongside of that, and then really focused on that and have worked as a freelancer for different agencies. Then I started to get brought in to help build out client workflows for teams to deliver SEO more efficiently. And then from 2016 onwards, I worked with thought leaders and content creators who have podcasts or books and a large body of thought leadership work to help them create evergreen ecosystems where they're getting a lot of inbound traffic and they have people coming into their mailing list, and their mailing list is automated as well. So it's really just creating a very customer-focused ecosystem for people to deliver their message and bring more customers into their brands.
And you also teach as well?
Yeah, so it was 2018 that I started teaching SEO for University of the Arts London, and then I think it was a year or two after that, L Education reached out. So I teach digital marketing strategy and search engine optimization for them as well. I also teach Google Analytics and email marketing for UAL. So I feel like I've got a bit of a portfolio career in that I've done a lot of things, but if my family asks me what I do, I'm a professional nerd. And I think with the AI side of things, obviously now I accidentally created an app that loads of people are using as a web application. And the journey with that felt very organic in terms of how it's grown. I was automating an internal process when I built that, and then it's allowed me space to do a lot more research and things. And one of the things that I've struggled with a lot over my career has been that I didn't go to university to study what I study. And when I started teaching at UAL, I was like, but I don't even have like a university degree. And so I think the struggle that we face in emerging technology is that it is emerging, and in order to be able to deliver it, you need to have experience, you need to understand like how to use it. So you don't necessarily need to have a degree, or the degree doesn't necessarily exist yet for how you would use AI in your work or business, but we still exist in a society that prioritizes having a degree, and it's very difficult to access jobs and things like that if you haven't been through that process. So I think the AI space is an interesting one because in order to apply it, you need to be able to be an observer of things and understand what the workflow is, what the system is, what can be automated, and having like an unbiased perspective is actually incredibly helpful. So just because you haven't been to university, or just because you've had done an apprenticeship or had a career in an alternate space, doesn't preclude you from being able to work in emerging technologies, as long as you have curiosity and willingness to learn.
And technology is evolving so much. As you say, there's so much new materials, systems, apps emerging. But do you think technology is more difficult to understand now, or do you think it's actually relative to our time period? Do you think it's got harder?
Yeah, I think there's more of it. So I think if you were to say, I want to understand technology, there's like a lot more to learn about how it's come to be and what impacts it. I think that the tools that are available make it easier to learn. But in order to, like, if you want to understand the internet, right, it's helpful to have had experience on the internet in the 2000s, the 2010s, and now the 2020s. But if you know what you want to learn about, it's really easy, because even things like ChatGPT, right, Perplexity AI, things like that, if you know the questions that you have, it's really easy to learn more about the topic, because we've got more information at our fingertips than we've ever had before. The issues are that is incredibly overwhelming, and also it's an irrelevant amount of content unless we have the right questions to ask, and unless we know what we want to get out of it, we can end up wasting more time than we save. So I think it's an exciting time, but I also think that having the skills to know how to ask the questions that you have is a really important skill to take into the workforce.
And you spoke, you mentioned then about tech making things easier. Ultimately, is that where the idea for your web application came from? You found the problem and you wanted to find a solution? Yeah,
so we have thousands of small business owners using it, and one of the key pieces, I'm always I'm a marketer, I know how people use numbers in marketing, and it's often to overinflate what has happened, or we'll take like a vanity metric and something that has very little meaning attached to it in terms of business bottom line, and we'll talk about that. We won't actually talk about the number of conversions. But for me, the fact that we've had so many small business owners email and say, I have just had a bereavement, I've just had, our children have been really unwell, I've had to move house, and I've been able to keep my business running because I've been able to automate so much of my marketing with Marketing Magic. I've not had to have like the creative energy available to keep it running. But we have so many people who it's saved me over 40 hours a month. And if you're a small business owner, you go into business because you really love doing something, or you're really good at something. And then you realize that in order to be really good at something, or to do what you're really good at, you have to learn how to do all of these other things to get clients and customers, to build your website, to do your marketing. And people end up spending 80% of their time learning how to be a business owner and do all of these other things rather than deliver the actual thing that they wanted to do. So I had built Marketing Magic to solve a content problem in my own team, and then realized the application of it when it comes to solving the problem of time and capacity and having to learn before you can do.
I think from what we've talked about so far as well, it's evident you're really passionate about tech, but I did hear on a podcast you featured on recently that you said you just love working on the internet.
Yes.
What is it about the internet that you love?
I think that's a really good question. I think seeing how it's evolved over time is fascinating. For me, the ability to observe humanity and trends is super interesting, and that's more like personal, observation. with the internet, things like social media, and then when you compare that, especially longer term, when you look at that and the impact it's had socially. So one of the things I've talked about a little bit is when we see platforms like social media and we look at some of the existential issues that people have had, this idea of like identity and you have to be perceived to be what you are in order for it to be valid is a real issue for people. So it's like, if it's not on the internet, it doesn't exist, right? If you haven't posted your boyfriend or your husband or your girlfriend or your partner on the internet, then they don't exist. And this idea that you have to be everything online in order to be authentic is fascinating, because we can never be fully online because we're embodied humans. So even if every thought that we ever had in our heads was on the internet, we ourselves are still embodied humans in real life, and we would not be able to be fully ourselves on the internet. And so when we look at something like AI, the prediction that I've made is the second wave of the identity crisis that we're going to see in our society is that we have been designed by our cultures and societies to go to school, to get the best grades that we can, to get into the best university that we can, to get the best degree that we can, to get the best job that we can, so that we can afford to pay a mortgage and do all of those things. So we have always tried to be the best and do the best and know the most. And then what happens when something knows more than you and can work faster than you? It, at an intrinsic level, feels like an existential threat to people. It feels like a threat to their security, because what value do you have to society if there's something that can do more than you can, more quickly than you can? And so I think that people are going to need to really unpick what that looks like for them in order to feel really comfortable with who they are and how they can be a part of the workforce when the metrics that have been used to get them to the workforce are you the best of the best? So that's another just interesting like cultural perspective that I think really fascinates me in terms of how the internet plays out. And we have access to people that we would never have met if we had not had the internet, right? We can find community. Some of my best friends are people that I met on the internet. I met my husband on the internet. I did meet him in real life first, but then Facebook suggested him as a friend. So as much as I have a problem with Meta, I'm like, cheers to Mark Zuckerberg for connecting me with my husband. So I think that the impact of it is significant, and it's a great equalizer, because you don't need to know the right people or have been to the right places in order to be able to pursue your goals and dreams and things that you want to do.
It's interesting when you say about metrics as well, because obviously as marketers, it's kind of ingrained in us that we reach those vanity metrics for followers, likes, but it's also a social thing as well. Even for people who are using social media personally, it's all about, I hope this gets this many likes or this many comments. Do you think it's getting worse as a society, especially with sort of like Gen Z wanting to hit those kind of vanity metrics for personal content, or do you think we'll see a bit more of an evolution with how social media is used?
Yeah, I can't speak to that in terms of Gen Z, because I am absolutely a millennial, chewed fast, embodied. But no, I can't speak to the Gen Z experience, but I do think that unless we address the reality of the internet is not our real life, like needing to touch grass is a real thing, right? It's like we all once a day need to go outside and touch grass, and understand that we are like valued and like loved and important parts of our real life physical communities. And just because it feels easier to be on the internet sometimes because we feel awkward in real life, or it's uncomfortable to be outside when it's hot when you could be inside or it's air conditioned and just talk to people online. Actually, those things are important reminders that we aren't a brain in a jar. We are a real human person. So I think that encouraging community connection is important for business owners and for students and for anyone in our society. It's like this idea that we, not to say everyone should work in the office, right? I'm not saying you should use this as an excuse to be like, everyone must work in the office. But I think it's more about encouraging human connection outside of work time, right? So you can have functional work time on the internet, perfect. And then how are we encouraging conversation and connection and community, and making sure that we have spaces to go to in real life where we can make friendships with people and get to know people, mess and all, because we're not, we don't live in a petri dish.
And the way we connect with people, obviously within our friendship communities, family communities, they're through apps as well. There's that kind of downtime. But there's so much more AI around us, I think, than most people would realise, particularly within those apps that we're using every day. But what are your thoughts on AI as a tool for good within education and to kind of ease industry processes?
Yes, I think the most brilliant thing about AI is its ability to provide you with context. So if we look at the way that the internet has developed, Google has built its business model on providing content. So it's searchable content, right? We can put a search query into Google and we can get 16 million plus results, right? 350 million results. There's so many results. And then we have to provide the context. We have to go through, we have to filter everything. We have to say, yes, that's relevant to me. No, that isn't. And when we use something like generative AI, we can provide the context, and then AI filters out all of the noise and provides us with a précis of the most important information that we need. And so in terms of overcoming overwhelm and making sure that we're not having to use unnecessary mental labor and creative energy on filtering out what's relevant to us, the ability to ask for context and to help our understanding is really significant. And especially with education, like I teach a lot of adult learners, but the concept of something is easy to deliver. Like the thing that is difficult is how does that concept apply to my context? And so if we're able to use things like AI to encourage people to find out what the context looks like for them and how they can integrate the idea with their experience, or to find out more about it if they aren't sure where to start with it, those are all really positive things that can help enrich education and provide a more nuanced learning pathway for individual students, rather than, teachers, for instance, having to deal with the context of 30 different students at once and not really being able to meet those students at the point of their need because they're overworked in so many other ways.
It's interesting we talk about that. So, teachers within a school space, educational space, the communities, our friendship, our families. Do you think robots, it's a big fear for people, are robots going to kill jobs, or will they help create them?
Yes, I think the first thing, and this is like the nerd in me, but robots and AI are obviously different. Yeah. So in terms of the artificial intelligence is the software, the robots are the hardware. So we are so far away from the hardware and the software being widely available enough to replace humans. So I think that, we aren't very good as humans at being able to imagine what the future looks like outside of what we already know. And there is someone who's talked about this somewhere, but it's this idea that your brain can't imagine anything different than it already knows. Yeah. So if you're setting goals, for instance, you can only set goals based on what you don't want to happen or what you want to happen differently based on your existing experience. So if we think about things like sci-fi movies and Hollywood and what Hollywood thinks of artificial intelligence and robotics, that is often what many of us think about. And unfortunately, the AI space has leaned a bit too hard into that with branding. And so we're seeing a lot of people use robot avatars and humanize their AI, when we really want to make it very clear that it is different, it's distinct, it's other than human, it is a tool for us to use. And so in the hands of the wrong people, then yes, there is always a risk that any tool can be misused. And the concern with AI is obviously that it's so scalable and it's able to think at the pace of 1,000 humans plus. But I don't think that it is ever going to replace humans. In terms of the job space, the job market is going to change, but that's not necessarily a bad thing, because should humans be spending their relational and social energy doing data entry if we can automate that? And the answer to that, I personally think, is like, no, let's find you a more interesting job to do. And Ocado is a really interesting example of this, because I think it was back in 2017. They had a team of like 2,000 software engineers who were all responsible for designing the logistics. So it's the systems of the logistics, but also then how that, talks to the packing processes and all of that. So it's really interesting, but the job has just transitioned and it's shifted and it's become something else. So with any, people talk about AI as the fourth industrial revolution. When the industrial revolution happened, we saw people move into factories instead of farms and fields. We saw people just migrate. And then when computers rolled around, people became data entry specialists and things like that instead of working in factory lines. So the job market 100% will change. And in order for us to be resilient to that, we need to have the skills that are things like curiosity, asking questions, being able to be resilient to changing circumstances, and understand that you've got a core set of skills that can be applied regardless of how the job market changes.
Interesting that you mentioned Hollywood as well, which kind of brings us on nicely to, it's such a huge topic, AI within the entertainment industry. What's your opinion on AI being used to kind of recreate songs or films?
Yeah, I think there are so many problems with the world that I personally don't understand why we are trying to use AI to create art instead of to solve like fundamental issues of survival that people experience. And I think that comes down to like who's designing it and what they're designing it to do. The other fascinating thing with the internet and this idea of like disruption, we're seeing companies like Uber be described as industry disruptors, because previously we would have got a taxi and now Uber exists and we can get a cheaper car. But it's disruption because it's creating profit for a very small number of shareholders. It hasn't actually innovated and made it better, because Uber hasn't taken responsibility for the impact on the drivers. It's just focused on carving out as much shareholder profit from a previously working industry that had parity in it. And so when we're thinking about things like Hollywood, and we think about Netflix and Disney Plus and these streaming companies, they ultimately are making decisions based on how they can increase the profitability of their businesses. I think the Disney CEO is paid something like 400 times the amount of the lowest paid employee in the company. It's like absolutely wild. And so the concern becomes like companies like that who are trying to use AI in film and television are often doing it for exploitative reasons, because they don't want to pay real people a fair and living wage. And attached to that is this idea that like our biometric data is for sale, like our faces are for sale, our bodies, our movements are for sale, and that's incredibly dehumanizing. And so as far as using it in the arts and in creativity, my challenge to companies whose focus is on that is, how can you instead apply your skill set in AI and technology to things that are going to allow humans to have the space for creativity and freedom of creative expression?
Definitely. And this brings us on to the trending in tech round. So AI has helped to produce a breakthrough in weather and climate forecasting, according to the Financial Times. Using a hybrid of machine learning and existing forecasting tools, a model led by Google successfully harnessed AI to conventional atmospheric physics models to track decades-long climate trends and extreme weather events such as cyclones. As AI evolves, what do you think the next big breakthrough will be?
So it's super interesting to have seen that piece of news come out, because I don't know how commonly known it is, because I only found this out like maybe last year, but the Moderna vaccine for COVID was actually created so quickly because of AI modelling. And the medical breakthroughs that can happen when you take trends in data and put them through an algorithm and then test out the different ways in which your DNA reacts and your genetics react to these different things. Like I'm not a scientist at all, but that's super interesting to me, because the ability to bring cures to market for things that are causing debilitating illness and disease and the way that can be applied is super fascinating. And also just for, again, on an ethical level, you're able to do things in a way that removes needing to test on animals for medications to come to market before they can be tested on humans as well. So there's a whole lot of interesting stuff around the medical side of things that I think is an interesting tool to analyze the data and then look at trends moving forwards. I'm always super cautious of AI being used in things that impact humans without there being like human intervention, human decision making. So I think it's a great tool for us to speed up workflows and so on. But the climate piece, super interesting. The medical space as well, interesting. But we have to always remember that AI only is as good as the data that is used to train it, and unfortunately a huge amount of data is incredibly biased and is potentially reinforcing systemic issues of racism and misogyny and sexism that exist within our medical system, our justice system, our sciences in general. But I think that's something that is really important for us to be mindful of as well, is that data quality is really important, and accountability and product safety must be at the forefront, because there are currently no government guidelines that exist for the majority of global organizations and companies. Like the EU is the furthest behind in AI technology, and it has the strictest rules around data privacy that protect citizens. So that really, as a a metric, kind of tells you everything you need to know. And so I think that that's an interesting one. But as far as the climate side of things, it's super fascinating to see how we can start to use technology to improve things and to kind of understand what could happen if we don't make changes now.
I'm intrigued to know what's kind of the best thing, or maybe your most favourite thing about AI.
I think it's the fact that for me personally, I think quickly, and I like being able to have a tool while I'm working that I can bounce things off of and kind of workshop things without needing to have fully verbalized it to a team member first. So for me personally, I enjoy being able to use it as a tool to make my workday more efficient and to help me get my ideas out of my head and into reality as a part of that. So I think that that's the biggest factor of saving me creative energy and giving me more space in my day. And I also enjoy using it for anything that is just like a boring task, right? If you can automate it, then I've made myself a rule that if I have to be doing it 3 or more times before I'm allowed to build an automation for it, because I love building automations.
Moving on to this or that for Tech Talks. So, battle of the brands when it comes to phones. Yes. Are you an iPhone or a Samsung person?
iPhone every time, and that is because it all talks to each other. So my iPhone and my Apple laptop and MacBook and everything all talk to each other, and it really just helps to have everything in one place.
And for music, are you a Spotify or Apple person?
I'm a Spotify person, yeah.
It's so clever now, the DJ function as well. I don't know if you've seen it, where it suggests like tracks that you used to listen to.
Their marketing is really great, and I've just never loved Apple Music. So yeah, Spotify every time.
And Netflix or cinema?
Oh, that one's tricky. Probably Netflix because of Bridgerton, but I do have an existential problem with them as a company, so I'm gonna put it with that. Yep. If I had to like choose about the existence of Netflix or the cinema, I would choose the cinema because it's really fun to be able to go and watch things on a big screen.
And we can look at Bridgerton as its own entity,
right?
Laptops or tablets?
Laptops every time. Yeah,
so much easier.
It's really odd. I can't think big on a tablet, like, or a small screen. I need to have either like big paper or a laptop screen. It's like really an odd one, but I like being able to watch stuff on my tablet. So if I'm watching like an online course or something, I'll have it set up on my tablet running. But anytime I'm doing work, then, or like booking something as well.
We were literally talking about this the other day. I feel like you can do little bits of Amazon orders on your phone, but when it comes to booking a holiday, get the laptop out.
Imagine booking a flight on vacation on your phone. Like, it's the biggest ick of all time. I would just be so stressed.
And so ChatGPT or virtual reality?
ChatGPT 100% of the time. Virtual reality is a kettle of fish we do not have time to go into. But I'm in short, virtual reality is this idea that we can try to replace the embodied elements of what it means to be a sensory human, and I'm not a big fan at all. Just get outside. Like, it's fine for some things, but I think the way that it's being pushed and the amount of effort that's going into it, you know, the Apple headset is like $3,500 or something. It's just like absolutely wildly unnecessary as far as I'm concerned, but that maybe makes me sound like a boomer, so
and so video calls or voice notes?
Voice notes.
I enjoy voice notes. I actually think they're easier than calls.
Yes, yeah. I love a voice note.
And they become mini podcasts in themselves.
Yes.
I don't know about you, but
yeah. I think the longest one I've ever sent is maybe like 11 minutes, maybe 13 minutes. But yeah, we're definitely into double-digit territory.
And finally, if you could bring back one original piece of tech that has either now evolved or since ceased to exist, what would it be and why?
It would absolutely be the Apple iBook clamshell with the colour. Like, how they haven't put that back yet is beyond me, but that one would be top of the list for sure. We'd all live our legally blonde moments.
Oh, well, Menekşe, it's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you so much for coming on. That brings us to the end of this week's episode of Akoni Tech Talks.
Thank you for having me.